And deputies say a Robeson County man walked around for nearly 29 years knowing he had brutally killed his mother-in-law.
Officers say no more. And tonight that man is behind bars facing life in prison. ABC 15's Tanya Brown joins us live outside the Robeson County Courthouse in downtown Lumberton, where the suspect appeared for a bond hearing this morning. Tanya.
On December 3rd, 1996, a 45-year-old woman was found stabbed to death inside her own home on Tom M. Road in Robeson County, North Carolina. She had been chased through more than one room, blood across the floors and along the walls. Nothing was stolen and nothing had been touched. Whoever came through her door had come for her and only her. Within days, her family walked into the sheriff's office and named someone they had known for years, someone who had been inside that house many times. They gave the name on the first day. In 1996, no science could match that blood to a specific person. The case stayed cold for 29 years, while the man the family had named lived a few miles down the same road, and her mother grew old, waiting for an arrest she never lived to see. Her name was Margaret Lois Bell. Margaret was 45, a mother and grandmother who lived by herself in a house on Tom M. Road. Margaret's house was in the Evans Crossroads area, a small rural community of scattered homes and farms outside the town of Rowland in southeastern Robeson County, North Carolina. Margaret Lois Bell was found dead inside her home that morning. The injuries across her body were bad. Someone had come into her house with a knife and hadn't stopped. Whatever happened inside that house, it wasn't a burglary gone wrong. Nothing in the house appeared to have been stolen. The place hadn't been ransacked or gone through by anyone. Everything about the scene pointed to one conclusion. Somebody came to hurt Margaret, and nothing else. What happened inside the home on that particular day wasn't random, and it wasn't quick. It was clear that Margaret had moved through more than one room during the attack. Blood found on the floors and along the walls tracked through several rooms of the house, telling the story of that movement. Wherever Margaret went, the attacker was right behind her. There were unmistakable signs of a violent struggle throughout the entire home. Deputies from the Robeson County Sheriff's Office were the first ones to arrive at the house on Tom M. Road that morning. They saw what had happened inside the home and immediately called in outside help. Agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation came in to handle the forensic work and collect evidence. The SBI had the lab equipment and the trained forensic specialists that a smaller rural county department like Robeson County simply didn't have on its own. Their agents went room by room, photographing everything and collecting blood samples from the floors, the walls, and the doorways. Anything from the scene that might turn out to be useful down the road was carefully bagged up and set aside. Once the scene had been fully processed, the investigation started with the people closest to Margaret. Detectives sat down and talked to her children, her siblings, her neighbors, and anyone who'd had any kind of contact with her in the days and weeks leading up to her death. Detectives asked about Margaret's daily routine, about who else had keys to the place, about who came and went on a regular basis, and about whether there'd been any trouble or tension in her life recently. Other members of the investigative team went up and down Tom M. Road, asking whether anyone had seen unfamiliar cars or people near Margaret's house on the day she was killed. The road was rural and quiet. The properties were spread far apart, separated by fields and tree lines and long gravel driveways. Strangers didn't come and go from a road like that without somebody noticing them. Anybody driving down that particular road without a clear reason to be there would have stood out to the people who lived along it. But nobody living along the road reported having seen anything out of the ordinary on the day Margaret was killed. Almost immediately, before detectives had even finished their canvass of the road, Margaret's family pointed them toward one person, Margaret's son-in-law. He was married to one of her daughters at the time. The family didn't sit around and wait for the detectives to come to them. When detectives did finally come around to talk to them, the family didn't hesitate for a second. Members of the Bell and Dial families went directly to the detectives working the case and said they believed the son-in-law was responsible for what happened to Margaret. They said it loud and clear on the very first day, and they kept on saying it again and again to anyone who would listen. The man the family was describing lived right there in Rowland, the same small town near the Evans Crossroads community where Margaret had lived. At the time of Margaret's murder back in 1996, he was in his mid-20s. He wasn't a stranger to Margaret, to the house, or to the surrounding property. According to the family, he had been inside Margaret's home plenty of times over the years and had been a regular part of the extended family's daily life. Detectives at the sheriff's office took the information seriously. In any homicide case where the victim's own family walks into the station and names a specific person, detectives are going to look at that person very closely. The son-in-law was brought into the station and questioned at length. The detectives asked him where he'd been on the day Margaret was found. They asked about his personal relationship with her and how the two of them got along. They asked him to explain the last time he'd been over to see Margaret and to account for any recent arguments or conflicts between the two of them. Every one of his answers was written down by the detectives and added to the growing case file. But sitting down with someone and asking them questions is one thing. Having enough hard evidence to actually charge someone with a crime is another thing altogether. The material collected from the crime scene was sent off to the state lab for testing, but DNA technology was still in its early stages at that point in the mid-1990s. The lab methods available to forensic scientists just weren't advanced enough to take a degraded sample from a crime scene and produce a clean result. They couldn't pin it on one specific person. The samples were tested as far as the science could take them at the time. After that, they were logged into the system and placed into long-term storage at the state lab. The family's belief didn't fade, not after a month and not after a year. They had given detectives the name. They had told them everything they knew. And then they watched as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into years, and nothing happened. No arrest was made, no charges were filed, and no news of any kind came through. The son-in-law went right back to his regular life in Roland, as if nothing at all had happened. For years, and then for decades, Margaret's family quietly carried the weight of what they believed he'd done without the legal system ever confirming it. They believed they knew exactly who did it. They just didn't have proof that would hold up in a courtroom. After that first round of investigation ran its course, the case went cold. Not because anyone at the sheriff's office gave up on it, but because the leads had all been exhausted. The forensic science available in 1996 simply could not close the gap between what the family believed and what the evidence could prove in court. All of the biological samples that had been collected from Margaret's home sat in the state lab. They were carefully preserved, but there was no scientific way to connect them to any one specific person. The sheriff's office changed leadership more than once over the decades that followed. New sheriffs took office, new detectives joined the department. But the files stayed in the system, passed from one administration to the next. Each new detective who picked up the Bell file read through the old interview notes, reviewed the evidence list, and asked the same question that every detective before them had asked. Had the science caught up yet? Was there finally a way to do what couldn't be done back in 1996? Each time, the answer came back the same. Not yet, maybe next year. And each time, without fail, the file went right back into the cabinet. Margaret's mother was still alive in the years after the murder. She had buried her own daughter, which no parent should ever have to do, and then spent every remaining day of her life waiting for someone to be held accountable for it. That call never came during her lifetime. She died years before the arrest that she had been hoping and praying for was finally made. When the time came, Margaret's own children buried their grandmother knowing the case was still open and unsolved. Meanwhile, the man the family had been talking about for years stayed in the area the entire time. He lived in Roland, just a few miles down the road from where Margaret had lived and died. In the same tight-knit community where Margaret's family still gathered for holidays and birthdays and funerals. Every year that passed without an arrest was another year the family had to live with the fact that the man they believed killed their mother and grandmother was walking around free. Margaret's family could still see him around town. They could drive right past his house and point to exactly where he was living. And for all of those long years, the legal system couldn't do a single thing about it. Then, in April of 2021, a full 25 years after Margaret's death, detectives from the Robeson County Sheriff's Office Homicide Division took a step that hadn't been available to the original investigators back in 1996. They went to a judge and asked for a search warrant. They wanted permission to collect a DNA sample directly from the man that Margaret's family had been pointing to for the past 25 years. The judge reviewed all of the evidence that had been compiled in the case file over the years and granted the request. The warrant wasn't based on guesswork. It was built on everything in the file, the family's original statements, the forensic material preserved from the crime scene, and the fact that the suspect was closely connected to Margaret and had spent time in and around her home before the murder. The difference between what was possible in 1996 and what was possible in 2021 came down to the science. By 2021, DNA analysis had finally advanced to the point where old, degraded crime scene material could be tested against a living person's DNA and produce results that would hold up in court. The sample was collected from the suspect and sealed. It was sent to the North Carolina State Crime Lab along with the evidence that had been sitting in storage since December of 1996. And after that, there was nothing for anyone to do but wait. State crime labs are backed up all across the country, and cold case evidence has to get in line behind whatever's happening right now. All of the evidence from the Tom M. Road case went into the lab's queue and waited its turn, just like every other cold case submission in the state. For nearly 4 years, the family heard nothing. Then, in February of 2025, the lab reached out to the sheriff's office and asked for one specific piece of evidence to be sent back for additional testing. That kind of request usually means the lab found something in the first round of testing that they wanted to look at again more carefully. The specific piece of evidence was repackaged and sent back to the lab. 8 days later, on February 13th, 2025, the State Crime Lab sent its final report back to the detectives in Robeson County. The DNA was a match. Biological material recovered from Margaret's home in 1996 contained DNA belonging to the man the family had suspected from the day she was found. When the lab results came back, they confirmed a direct connection between the crime scene samples from 1996 and the DNA sample collected through the 2021 search warrant. The comparison between the two DNA samples left absolutely no room for doubt. After all those years of the family saying the same name, the science had finally caught up to the family. On February 14th, 2025, a Friday evening at about 5:30 p.m., homicide detectives drove to a house in Roland, knocked on the door, and arrested the man without incident. He was placed in handcuffs and formally charged with first-degree murder in the 1996 stabbing death of Margaret Lois Bell. He was put into the back of a patrol car and driven to the county jail in Lumberton. A judge denied his request for bond and appointed a public defender to represent him in court. After nearly 3 decades of walking free in the same county where Margaret was killed, the man that the family had named was finally behind bars. Later that evening, after the arrest was made, the detectives got back in their cars and drove straight to the home of Margaret's family. They certainly weren't going to make a phone call for something like this. They wanted Margaret's family to hear it face to face. For 28 years, we have wondered who did this, Amy Dial, Margaret's daughter-in-law, said. Friday night, the detectives came to our house to let us know that it had been solved. 28 years of waiting. And then the answer to their question finally came on a winter evening in February. His name was Kenneth Delton Locklear. At the time of his arrest in February, Locklear was 55 years old. That put him at approximately 26 years old at the time of Margaret's death in 1996. Locklear had spent virtually his entire adult life living right there in the Roland area, the same small community where Margaret's family still lived and gathered. Back in 1996, Locklear had been Margaret's son-in-law, married to one of her daughters. He wasn't some stranger who had wandered in off the road. He was someone that the entire family knew well, someone they had gone directly to the police about within days of the crime. His full legal name had been sitting right there in that case file since the week after the murder. Up to that point in his life, Locklear had no violent criminal record. He had simply never been arrested for anything serious enough to get his DNA taken and put into a database. Without that 2021 warrant, the evidence from Margaret's home would have sat in the state lab forever with nothing to compare it to. The entire case only came together because the detectives had one specific name to test against, and that name had come directly from the family all the way back in 1996. This case wasn't solved the way most DNA cold cases get solved. There was no genealogy search through ancestry databases. There was no database hit from a distant relative's consumer DNA test. It was solved in what might be the simplest and most direct way possible: a straight comparison. Margaret's family had given the detectives the name all the way back in December of 1996. All of the years in between were just the time it took for the science to finally catch up to what Margaret's family had been saying all along. 3 days after the arrest, on February 17, 2025, Robeson County Sheriff Bernice Wilkins held a press conference to announce the arrest and the DNA results publicly. The room was full. Members of the Bell and Dial families filled the front rows, some of them holding hands, some in tears. Detectives who had worked the case at various points over the past 3 decades stood alongside the current investigative team. Some of those men and women had been carrying this particular case for years before it was finally resolved. It was a brutal attack, and it needed to be solved, Wilkins said. Just to know someone has been walking around for almost 29 years and not held accountable for it is sickening. Wilkins mentioned that Margaret's mother had died before the arrest. "I wish she had been alive here today to see this for herself," the sheriff said. The room went quiet when he said it. Alice Bell, a member of Margaret's extended family, stepped up to the podium to speak on behalf of the family. "Margaret Lois Bell's story does not end with tragedy," Alice said. "It ends with real justice. And today, right here in this room, we take one step closer to that reality." Amy Dial, Margaret's daughter-in-law, also addressed the room. Dial had married into the Bell family years ago. She had watched the weight of the unsolved case pass through the generations, from Margaret's mother to her children to the grandchildren who had only ever known their grandmother from photographs on the wall. Margaret never got to know her grandchildren, and that has been a burden on this family for a long time, Dial said. But today, finally, we can see that justice has come for Miss Margaret Bell. 2 months after his arrest, on April 18, 2025, Kenneth Delton Locklear died at the Robeson County Jail. Staff at the detention center responded to a medical emergency involving Locklear at approximately 2:06 in the morning. He was pronounced dead at the detention facility a short time later that morning. The sheriff's office asked the state to look into how he died. Kenneth Delton Locklear died without standing trial. He died without ever being convicted. He died in a cell in the same county where Margaret Lois Bell had been found on the floor of her home 29 years earlier. The DNA had connected him to the crime scene. The arrest had been made. Charges had been formally filed. But the trial that would have put 12 jurors in a room and asked them to weigh the evidence against him never took place. Margaret's family had spent nearly 3 decades hoping for an arrest. They finally got it. But what they didn't get, and what they would never get, was the trial or the verdict. A small house on a rural road in Robeson County, a mother who lived alone, and a son-in-law that the family pointed to from the very first day. His name sat in that file for the next 29 years. It took a DNA warrant, served 25 years after the murder, a state crime lab, to turn what the family already knew into proof. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. More solved cases in the playlist.